behind that launch. But Hezbollah has a record of denying activities that they did. And it has to be understood, this decision made to launch these rockets in the context of an ongoing debate inside Lebanon about Hezbollah weapons. And as Nick has said, Israeli behavior, whether it's many violations of the ceasefire agreement struck last November, of Lebanese territory, of Lebanese airspace.
In this channel, will not only make you laugh, but will also bring you current and undiluted and unfiltered news as it is hot. Do you know that any news you do not find in this channel does not exist? And that news is not a news. Say no more. Guys, let's get into this.
Violence intensifies in the Middle East. Israel bombs Lebanon again, and the US carries out new attacks on Yemen's Houthis, all while Israel resumes its genocide in Gaza. With previous fragile ceasefires now shattered, what's the danger of a wider regional conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Israel bombs Lebanon with renewed ferocity, just as months of painstaking diplomacy to forge a ceasefire in Gaza was destroyed in a day. Women, babies, the elderly, everyone is a target. Many burned to death while sleeping in plastic tents. Lives cut short in infernos unleashed by the world's most sophisticated weaponry. All at the command of an Israeli leader who's decided the genocide will go on with Western firepower. Also in the region, the US launches missiles at Yemen as Houthi attacks on Israel resume. It's a grim picture that's reigniting fears of a wider conflict in the Middle East. So what's driving this? Can peace be found? Are there any limits to Israel's actions? We'll be talking to our panel in a few moments, but first this report from Victoria Gatenby.
The Israeli military says airstrikes across southern Lebanon are targeting Hezbollah positions in response to cross-border rocket fire. Hezbollah denies launching any rockets. It accuses Israel of repeatedly violating a ceasefire that came into effect in November by carrying out more than 1,000 attacks on Lebanon.
For Israel to say, well, we don't care, somebody fired and we have to fire back, it means they are simply adding fuel to the fire and making a messy situation even more chaotic than it needs to be.
The escalation comes at a time of increased tensions in the region. In Yemen, a wave of US air raids has targeted the Iran-backed Houthis in the past week. Washington says such unrelenting lethal force will continue until the armed group agrees to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea, which fighters say they're doing in solidarity with Palestinians. And in Gaza, Israel has launched its heaviest bombardment of the Strip since the 19th of January, breaking the ceasefire it agreed with Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says negotiations with Hamas will only continue under fire. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed, many of them women and children.
This is our homeland. How do they think they can uproot us? We will not leave Gaza, nor will we go to another country. They can kill us in Gaza. We only want Gaza.
Witnesses say the bombs Israel dropped recently appear to be more powerful than those used earlier in the war. They say the Israeli military is using the munitions in densely populated residential areas. UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese posted on social media, "The world we have known till now has come to an end. No more civilians in armed conflict, only legitimate targets, human shields, terrorists, collateral damage. Western pretense of civility is over." There's been widespread international condemnation of Israel's renewed military offensive in Gaza. Escalation on the Lebanon-Israel border and attacks in Yemen risk further destabilising an already tense region. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's take this on with our guests. From Tel Aviv, we're joined by Alon Pinkas, who's a former Israeli consul general in New York. He was also a political advisor to two former Israeli prime ministers, Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak. In Dayton, in Ohio, is Randa Slim, director of the Track 2 Dialogues Initiative at the Wilson Center's Middle East program. And in New York is Nicholas No, the director of the Beirut Exchange Research Conference and editor-in-chief of the news service MideastWire.com. A warm welcome to you all. So, things clearly very, very tense. I'd like to try and break it down a bit because it's all, as we know, it's interconnected, and what goes on in any of these lands, be it Gaza, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, affects each of the others and the rest of the world besides. So let's start with Lebanon. And Nicholas No in New York, we've seen, as we've just heard, we've seen the worst violence since the ceasefire came into effect in November in Lebanon. How dangerous is this moment, and can it be contained?
The moment is dangerous because the underlying dynamics are not improving. Hezbollah retains significant military capabilities. Israel retains occupied territory inside Lebanon. Does not seem as if it will leave anytime soon. And the Israelis and the Trump administration both are in a kind of mode in the region of supremacy, of peace through military victory, and of really, frankly, expansion as well. We see that with Israeli actions in Syria and a creeping occupation there, perhaps even some alliances with some Druze communities. We see constant bombings by the Israelis inside Syria. We see in the West Bank and in Gaza, of course, the reignited conflict in Gaza, as well as possible expansionism or actual expansionism, as announced today, with new settlements in the West Bank. And in Lebanon, you basically have a situation where there is a new government that is, relatively friendly with America, friendly with Trump's sort of America, and also one that has stated very clearly that the era of Hezbollah's weapons outside of the state is over. Now, the contradiction here is that the Lebanese state is very weak, the army is weak, and the Israelis, for decades and going forward, do not and will not support a Lebanese armed forces that can actually be strong.
Let's put that to Randa. Do you agree with that sentiment, Randa, that things are only going to get worse unless some serious diplomacy is done?
Well, I mean, I do not agree with the premise that things will escalate. Partly because all the parties are not interested at this point in this further escalation. Having said that, I think the decision to escalate more than what we have seen right now rests really with two men, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel and the US President in Trump. The 5 rockets that were launched from Lebanon across the border. Hezbollah has denied being the party behind that launch, but Hezbollah has a record of denying activities that they did. And it has to be understood, this decision made to launch these rockets in the context of an ongoing debate inside Lebanon about Hezbollah weapons. And as Nick has said, Israeli behavior, whether it's the many violations of the ceasefire agreement struck last November, of Lebanese territory, of Lebanese airspace, with the escalation in the last 2 days, basically does not make the job of the Lebanese government easier in this debate that is ongoing about disarming Hezbollah's weapons, which a majority of Lebanese really want to see. And so this push and pull that's taking place now is something will continue. And as Nick said, it looks like there is a convergence of interest between Tehran and Tel Aviv in denying both the governments in Lebanon and the governments in Syria the ability to assume total sovereignty over their territories and to disarm these different non-state armed groups, be it Hezbollah in Lebanon or be it the different militias in Syria.
Okay, let's get the view from Tel Aviv. Alon Pinkas, do you think these attacks are all about provoking Israel, and what does Israel want from Lebanon?
Well, we've talked about that. Well, you've talked about escalation, and I agree with both Randa and Nicholas about the dynamics. Even though They seem to somewhat disagree on the premise, but it's all leading to the same point. But we're talking about two theaters that are already active, Gaza and southern Lebanon. Where escalation may happen, where the war can expand, is to the West Bank, where 3.5 million Palestinians live, and more importantly, or more dangerously and explosively, into an Israeli-Iranian war, which Mr. Netanyahu hopes the U.S. will get involved too. So yes, there is a potential for escalation all around. But there is one thing missing until now from our conversation, and that is the domestic Israeli context. Mr. Netanyahu has a vested interest in perpetuating war. He needlessly extended the war in Gaza for 15 months. He needlessly, in an unprovoked way, violated the ceasefire in Gaza and reignited or resumed the war 5 days ago. And about a month ago, he did not abide by the ceasefire agreement and did not withdraw from South Lebanon. So what you saw with these 5 rockets, whether Rhonda is right and it is Hezbollah, or she hinted that it could very well be Hezbollah, or I don't know, maybe it's the Swedish Girl Scouts, who knows? But whomever shot those missiles gave Israel the perfect pretext not to continue on with the eventual withdrawal from southern Lebanon. So any way you look at it, the arenas that haven't been expanded yet, and the two theaters where it is going on, Lebanon and Gaza, it is explosive.
Right, Randa, Lebanon, of course, shares a border with Syria, where the dynamic has shifted enormously there with Assad out and al-Shara in. How does that play out, especially again with the Israeli presence in Syria?
I mean, the Lebanese government really faces already numerous challenges in dealing with the economy, which has been, which is in a bankruptcy stage. And now their bandwidth is being overwhelmed by the challenges arising on the border with Israel. And I have to add to what Alan had said. The Israeli violations of the ceasefire agreement struck last November are not just yesterday's escalation. I mean, they have been violating Lebanese sovereignty since that deal. They have extended the timetable of their withdrawal in violation of the deal twice. And they still, as Alan said, occupy 5 outposts inside Lebanon. So on the other hand, we have seen also thousands of new refugees coming from the coastal area in Syria, coming into Lebanon, especially in the northern part of Lebanon. And there you already have a lot of friction that has been long-standing between a Alawite community and a majority Sunni community. And so you have this Lebanese government having to deal on top of the economic challenges, which are enormous, having basically to devote most of its efforts on dealing with the challenge arising from the Israeli violation in the south, and then the refugee flow, as well as the altercation that has been taking place between units that are closely affiliated with Hezbollah, tribes, groups, and the forces of the Syrian government. So you have these dynamics now, on the borders, both sets of borders, which are really threatening the internal stability of the country.
And Nick, what do you make of those dynamics? And let's throw Yemen into the pot as well, and the Houthis firing rockets across, and the US, attacking Houthi sites within Yemen. How do you think that all fits into the mix?
I think, there's been great discussions about the end of this so-called axis of resistance. And I think probably in some ways that's somewhat premature. It's evident that across several different fields or several different arenas, there is still a set of powerful military actors in Iraq, of course, the state of Iran, of course, the Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen, as well as in Palestine and as well as in Lebanon. These areas where the former axis of resistance, kind of put up what they thought was a military balance somehow with the Israelis. While that balance has been substantially recalibrated in favor of the US and Israel, they are not vanquished. And I think that the sort of the ability of the Houthis to still play a meaningful military role in this overall sort of conflict zone is important. Let's also remember that in the last few days, a number of Iraqi leaders were anticipating major military strikes by the Israelis, possibly with the Americans, in Iraq. There are a series of ongoing conflicts that are, I think, not going to be going away anytime soon, primarily because the Trump administration and the Israeli government are pursuing a policy, a maximalist policy, that is more focused on victory through tremendously strong military means rather than through negotiations and mutual concessions. Let's kind of reverse engineer it in Lebanon. Right now, the Israelis are in probably their best position in decades. It's certainly since they withdrew under Hezbollah fire in the year 2000 from their long-term occupation of Lebanon. They have a Lebanese state that has committed to ending the kind of weapons outside of the state control, which means Hezbollah. They have a Lebanese army that is more assertive and also more capable, it's true. However, Israel is going to persist, it seems, in creating new zones of occupation. It's going to persist in creating what I believe and some others believe are going to be new forms of resistance. They also are refusing, and will, I think, continue to refuse, arming the Lebanese army in a meaningful way, because the Israeli government, for a long-standing policy, prefers to have weak states on its periphery, or on its borders, rather. And I think, unfortunately, that seems as though it's going to persist. Given all of that, and given the expansionism we're seeing, given the reliance on using these tremendously powerful weapons of war, I think that we're unfortunately going to see not escalation, but we're going to see constant violence, constant conflict. And indeed, at certain moments, perhaps as your speaker alluded to, in the coming months, it seems that there's a kind of deadline, let's say, around Iran and around the Iranian nuclear program, but also Iranian role in the region, which includes Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. Okay. And that time window is going to be basically called by the Trump administration with the Israelis at some point in the next 2-3 months, we think.
Sure. Let me just throw that to Alon. Just give us your response to that, first of all, and whether or not you think, I mean, it's the point that you raised yourself about Trump and Iran, whether or not, you know, Israel may want to flare up a conflagration with Iran, but does the United States?
It's a good question, and that remains to be seen. There, I have no doubt, Nick, I have no doubt that Mr. Netanyahu wants to drag the U.S. into a confrontation with Iran. I have no doubt this has been his long-time policy to get the U.S. to attack Iran. I'm not sure that's going to succeed, and the last thing he wants to be guilty of is trying to manipulate Trump, because I'm not sure that Trump is going to be very tolerant or understanding to being conned and duped and manipulated by Mr. Netanyahu. All that being said, Trump stated publicly that he prefers a deal with Iran. Yes, he goes through the bully, the pumping of the chest, maximum pressure and threats and so on and so forth. But he did send a letter to the Supreme Leader, to Ali Khamenei, and to President Pezeshkian 2 weeks ago, in which he gave Iran 2 months, which is sort of an ultimatum, but still leaves some leeway, some latitude for negotiations. I think that the most important factor, Nick, here is Saudi Arabia. The Saudis want a deal with Iran, not a confrontation. And I think that the Saudis, I may be proven wrong, of course, but I think that the Saudis have a much bigger sway and influence over Trump than Mr. Netanyahu could ever have. Given that Mr. Trump's attention span is very short, narrow, and temporary, and that it now covers not just Greenland, Canada, Panama, and Mexico, but also Ukraine, I don't know how much attention he's going to give to the Iranian issue. So, look, just a week ago, if I may just, interject myself, just a week ago, he came out with this bold statement that any Houthi attack would be construed as coming from Iran, and the U.S. would react or retaliate accordingly. Well, the Houthis launched missiles into Israel, all of which were intercepted away from Israel, but nonetheless, they launched 3 barrages of missiles, 3 missiles, 5 missiles, I don't know the exact number. What did the U.S. do to Iran? Nothing. So my point here is, yes, the most dangerous and potential conflagration is between Israel and Iran, with or without the U.S. I am not at all sure that Trump is interested in such a war.
I was going to bring up the Saudis. Of course, the Saudis are talking Donald Trump's lingo, aren't they, with talk of a $600 billion investment. So, Randall, what do you think about the Saudi element in all this, and how, what kind of mediation role potentially that they could play in? With the idea for Trump is that you get them on side for normalization of relations with Israel.
The Iranian officials in indirect talks have already mentioned their interest in having the Saudi play a mediation role between them and the United States. The Saudi authorities are definitely interested in averting a Iranian-Israeli conflagration. The United States, Mr. Trump, is not interested in launching or in getting dragged into a war on behalf of Israel or with Israel against Iran. And so, having said that, but the problem is that will this deal between Iran and the United States, if it is struck, and in my opinion, it has a good chance of getting struck over not only the nuclear program of Iran, but also because of Saudi and other Gulf countries' interest over Iran's regional activities. We might eventually enter a phase and there is a good probability of that. It's not too high, but there's a good probability. We might enter a phase where we can start dismantling this conflict system the region has been struck in. The axis of resistance is there, but it's significantly weakened. There is ongoing debate inside Iran right now about the benefits of this axis of resistance. Definitely there is debate about the forward defense strategy and what is the better deterrent strategy that Iran can have in defense of the homeland and not necessarily reliant on the resistance. The publics in the resistance of Axis countries, be it Lebanon, be it Iraq, be it Syria, be it even Yemen, are definitely not in favor of their countries becoming battlefields or proxies, theaters
Randall, I'm just jumping in there
because
we're just coming towards the end of the show. Sorry to jump in, but I just want to pass it on to Nick. Back to the seminal question about the dangers of a wider regional conflict here. And I was chatting with my producer just before the programme, and we were both saying that we seem to be saying this for a long time, for the past few months, we don't know a time as dangerous as this. What with everything that's going on in this region and with Ukraine and Russia as well.
Yeah, it's really the job of kind of analysts, and Rhonda's been in this for far longer than I have, but it's obviously, I think, the most complicated time to be trying to predict or foreshadow or talk about what may or may not happen. I think you can really keep your finger on just a few kind of macro trends that seem to be overwhelmingly true, which is, one, the march forward appears to be very much an authoritarian one. So even if this sort of the security or insecurity of the Middle East gets dealt with, it's going to be much more likely to be dealt with through authoritarianism, through occupation, and through the regular application of overwhelming military force with no limits. The idea of kind of boundaries and limitations on war fighting capabilities, I think, ended at least a year and a half ago. And it ended very much under the sponsorship of the US Biden administration. And it's now, I think, much more likely to be carried towards sort of even further limits by the Trump administration. Despite how much Trump, it seems we all assume, wants things to be cooled down, he wants peace on his terms, which are invariably quite maximalist terms. So I think, yes, we are in, it's obviously for 15, 16 months, we've all been saying on this show and elsewhere about how incredibly dangerous and unstable, and we haven't seen this in years or decades. That is very true. It's very hard to predict. And unfortunately, I think the tendency seems very clear that we are going to be in a period of prolonged, regular military conflict in a number of different theaters. And I think that the actors, the politicians, and the leaders that are controlling these decisions and the unprecedented technological military capabilities which they now have, I think that they are possibly the worst people at this moment in history to be in charge of these decisions of war and peace and life and death, unfortunately so.
All right, Alon Pinkas, is there a sense in Israel that perhaps Netanyahu believes that the wind is all blowing his way, that this might be the moment, that he's got nothing to lose, that he may as well go as far as he possibly can on the road to a greater Israel?
Well, yeah, but that would be extraordinarily myopic and reckless even by his standards. I could not agree more with what Nicholas just described. There's an abject, abysmal lack of leadership, lack of vision, lack of courage, lack of imagination throughout the Middle East, and Israel is no exception. And back to your question, Nick, so Netanyahu thinks the winds the wind is behind his sails. Okay, so what? So what's he going to do? He's going to occupy Gaza, own 2.3 million Palestinians, reconstruct the rubble and devastation that you're showing on the split screen right now. What is he going to do? Annex the West Bank? And enlarge or expand Israel's presence in southern Lebanon, go a few more kilometers into Syria? What the hell for? What's in it for Israel? What's in it for him? It's just going to go back and perpetuate exactly what Nicholas just said a moment ago. A decade, and I'm using decade arbitrarily, it could be 5 years, it could be 20 years. A decade of ongoing use of limitless violence.
Randa, final question to you. What ultimately do you think would be the tipping point for Arab neighbors to come together and say enough is enough? Israel cannot do this any longer. We must act more forcefully.
Very good question. I've been asking this question for a long time. What's going to be the tipping point for a collective Arab response, Now, we have seen efforts recently in this direction, led by Saudi Arabia with the Egypt plan. It all is going to depend on how strong they are, how united they are in making their case to the Trump administration about their Gaza plan and about their ability to implement it. I agree with Mr. Pinkas that Saudi Arabia right now stands to be a leader in making this narrative to the Trump administration, or at least in standing the best chance in making this argument to the Trump administration and in maybe convincing Trump. Now, whether Mr. Trump will be convinced, his attention is focused on Ukraine, not necessarily on the region. It's yet to be seen. But definitely we are in dangerous times, but also there are opportunities, again, as I said earlier, for starting to dismantle this conflict system this region has been stuck in. At the heart of it is going to be the Palestinian issues. That conflict cannot be evaded. It's at the center. It's basically the center of this conflict system. And unless Israel and the Palestinians come to certain kind of agreement on basically coexisting going forward, these dynamics that we have been talking about will continue to exist, escalate, whatever. But we have a good chance right now at seeing that happen.
All right, an opportunity amid all this grim news. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed to Alon Pinkas, Randa Slim, and Nicholas No. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having stayed to the end of this very video. I'm glad you made it to the end. Please, can I ask you just for one more favor? Could you just give this video a thumb up? And please, have you subscribed to this channel? If you haven't, Biko, please, could you just subscribe to the channel and tap the notification button so anytime I drop a video, you will be first to be notified. Thank you, and may God bless you. See you on the next one.